Cubiak crossed the foyer to the stairwell. To avoid contaminating the carpeting near the top step, he leaned into the wall and looked down toward the lower hall. A vine of blue flowers spiraled through the center of the carpet runner. Lydia lay directly in front of it, as if she had followed the floral path in flying to her death. Her body, clad in a white sweater and trousers, sprawled face down on the terracotta tiles. Her head was twisted to the side, her face hidden in the shadows. One arm was tucked under her torso, the other stretched out in front of her as if she'd been reaching for something. Viewed from above, her petite, slender frame appeared almost childlike, like a crumpled snow angel, the sheriff thought. That is from the latest Dave Cubiak mystery, Death Casts a Shadow by Patricia Skalka. Welcome, Patricia.
Good morning. Nice to be here, Tracy.
So nice to have you today. Let me just introduce you to readers. Patricia Skalka is the award-winning author of the Dave Cubiak Door County Mysteries. She was recognized by US Today in an article titled Travel the Country with These Evocative Reads. Death Casts a Shadow is the last and final book in the series. Thank you so much for coming.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Yeah. So Dave Cubiak, obviously, is the tortured protagonist and the once reluctant sheriff of Door County. He has come a long way since book one. Death Stalks Door County is book one. Can you talk a little bit about your character's journey?
Yes, and it's interesting that you start with that question because as writers, we always talk about story arcs. So each of the books in the series, and there are 7, so each book has a story arc. But the overriding story arc, the frame of the entire series, is Cubiak's personal journey of redemption.
Right.
And you learn on page 1 or maybe page 2 of the first book that he feels responsible and guilty over the deaths of his young wife and daughter when he was a homicide cop in Chicago. And he's just burdened by grief and guilt. And so the whole reason for writing this series was to show how someone has to take time, how time is necessary, and not just time, but it's an important ingredient in working through this. We live in a society where, we use the word closure, which I hate. You close the door, it's all done, well, you move on to something else. It doesn't work that way.
Grief isn't like that.
Yeah. And I wanted it to be very real for Cubiak. And so I made decisions at the beginning. Well, originally I thought I was just going to write one book, and then it turned into a series. But I realized that as I was working on the first book, that it lent itself to that. And I knew that I had to help him get beyond where he was. And the only way I could do that was by moving him through time. So the books all move through time. When we meet Cubiak in the first book, he's 42. And by the time in the 7th book, he is in his early 60s. And so over the course of time, he changes, life changes, and he learns to accept what has happened. And there are multiple people who help him with lessons along the way. And it's a theme that runs through each of the books. And it's not, it's not overwhelming, but it's there. It's always there. He has something to deal with. The memories, just everything, things come out of left field and just knock you off your track. And this happens to him.
Yeah, it does. So let's talk a little bit about the last book in the series. And what I loved about Death Casts a Shadow is how deftly you tied together 2 different crimes. The book opens with our character checking on Lydia McAllister, who I was just reading about her death scene. And she's a wealthy heiress. She professes her love for a man she's never met. Can you describe this insidious relationship?
Well, it's the way many, not all, but many relationships that develop online, depending, of course, on who's behind them. have that kind of insidious nature to them. Someone tries to get your trust, someone beguiles you with this, that, or the other thing. And all of a sudden you're involved with someone that you don't really know, but
Right.
you feel you trust them, you think you know them. And this is what happens to Lydia. And there are circumstances. She's a very, she's in tune to life, and she knows these kinds of things happen. So she's very smart, but her situation is different. Everybody always says my situation is different, but hers
Right.
really is, because the person who is reaching out to her is a former friend of her husband's from when he
Right.
was in college. And so it's all very credible to her, even
Right.
though she did not meet her husband until he was getting his MBA. So she never met this individual, but it seems so natural. She's widowed. He expresses his sympathies, a little bit late, a few years later, but I just found out about it. I mean, this is all very realistic. And
Right.
this is how the relationship starts.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very creepy. It is a good message for people to hear about too, I think, because I think people need to be aware that, stalkers aren't just taking your identity. They can like get into your head.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, and I read, I do a lot of research. So I had a whole stack of articles where I read about this happening to people, and it usually happens to women.
yeah.
And it just made me really angry. And and so I knew I wanted to use that somehow in one of the books. And this one presented itself as a way to do that.
It was perfect. So, and then Lydia dies.
Yeah.
Yep. It appears to be an accident. And Dave Cubiak has just begun investigating her death when there's a second tragic death. So Bobby Fells is the suspected victim, and he is a long way from wealthy, and he has no heir. Can you talk about his accident?
Yeah, Bobby worked for Lydia, so that's kind of they're connected in that way. He did lawn work and shoveled snow. He had a pickup truck with a snowplow on it, and his sister also worked for Lydia. She was a housekeeper. So Kubiak is like this, and it's winter. The whole story takes place in winter. Now, several years ago, I did a presentation at a yacht club just right in Sturgeon Bay that overlooks the frozen bay, and the image was just stunning to me, because there's a little community out there, a village of little houses and shacks and things and cars and vehicles. They're all ice fishing,
Yep.
and right down the middle is a black line. It looked like a black line when you're up in this building, and it is open water, and it's the line that that's cut through the ice. So these barges that could come through to get to the shipyards for their winter tune-ups and repair jobs. And I stood there thinking, I was like Cubiak. I have Cubiak standing at the window looking at this thinking, oh my God, this is a disaster waiting to happen. I kept waiting for someone to back in, to fall in, to walk over, a dog to fall in. So that's a very real scene. And I, since I always wanted the last book to be winter. So all of these pieces kind of came together, and of course there is something happens. It's a beautiful day and it's cold, it's frigid, but there's all this activity going on down there, and Kubiak is like, oh, and someone says, oh, never mind, nothing ever happens, they're fine. And then of course something happens, and it happens that it involves, everyone thinks it's Bobby who's involved. So that is the tone is set for the ongoing story.
Right. Definitely set. So like I said earlier, I love the way that you tied the two deaths together, showing both the extremes of the very wealthy, and Bobby Fells is quite the opposite of that. And one of the tools that you used was an extensive history of their fictional families. And I wondered, as a writer, if you wrote the history first before you journeyed into the present day murder?
No, I didn't. Now I have been researching Door County history for years. I mean, all the time I've been writing the whole series. So I knew a lot of the background. It used to be a very, it's this idyllic vacation area now, and tourists and I mean, they still have the shipbuilding, but a third of the economy depends on tourism and summer visitors. But it used to be a very rough and tumble place. I mean, it was the edge of the frontier in the United States. When you think about it, at one point, that was the West. And so you had logging, you had fishing, you had a lot of just lost people who were just there to make a living. And a lot of scandals would go on, a lot of dealing, under the table, behind the table. People lost fortunes this way or the other. Industries came and went, and people's livelihoods came and went with it. So Door County had a really a background that was very comparable to like a frontier kind of background in a sense. So I was looking for, I needed something tangible. And I was looking up different ways that how are people cheated? Are they cheated through business losses? Are they cheated through Ponzi schemes? Are they cheated through, so I was looking for that kind of background. As I was developing the rest of the story, I knew that something was going to be in the past where someone got dealt out of what they were owed. And but it had to be tangible. So I came up with the idea of property, because there are always maps, there are always records, there are always, something that could be proven. And Door County, you can find all of this stuff. So that's how that piece of it came into being. And I know, I mean, if you fly over the peninsula, you will see some magnificent, huge homes that are just kind of tucked away. There's a lot of wealth up there, and it's not really necessarily extremely visible. So all of these pieces came together for me.
Yeah. Oh, that's really great. So what is your process as a writer? How do you go about, you plot out the story, or you pants it a little bit, or?
I tend to plot out. If I pants, I always end up in a bad place. I have to I have to track back and correct whatever it is I've done. But I have a sense of, and maybe it's just the way my mind works, but I feel that writing a book is a two-step process. So first you have the story, and then you write the story. Now, I know a lot of people just sit down and start writing, and they do a magnificent job of it, and I can't do that. I have to know the story. And then when I sit down to write, I don't have to worry about the story. I mean, I don't have to think, well, what comes next and now what? Because I know. And I've worked all of that out beforehand. So that's where I don't have writer's block per se, because I always know what's happening, but I have thinker's block. And I'm working through the process. I'll come to a brick wall, or I'll realize I've got myself in a blind spot, and how do I get out of it? That's when I figure all of that out. So it is, and as I'm working through that, like this background on the families, I knew I needed something. And so I was researching that while I was also thinking the story through.
Yeah. That's really good. It's good for other writers to know people's processes, and everybody's so different, Yeah. And I pants up until I get to a point where I need to do the research. Oh, look at what's happening now. Then I have to figure things out, and I'll do the research then. But so rare and valuable artwork plays a part in the story as well. And you talk about the Remington bronzes, which are quite famous.
Yeah.
That must have been fun research.
Oh, it was. And, I needed something, again, that had been collected by a past generation and by a man who was a man of industry. So what would appeal to, what would someone like that want to collect? So I remembered seeing some of the Remingtons at the Art Institute of Chicago and just being struck by how beautiful they were and how powerful. And I thought, and the timing worked on when he lived and when the various bronzes were being produced, the original bronzes. And so I thought, well, that's it. That's got to be it. And then I started I thought it was going to be really simple. I always think things are going to be simple, and they always turn out to be so complicated. You get a print and it's like 1 of 200. Oh, okay. Well, here's a bronze. Is it like 2 of 500? Is it 2 of 10? The Remington bronzes are not like that at all. It's very complicated. there are three categories of what is authentic, and it depends on whether Remington was still alive, and it depends on whether it was, it got to be a huge muddle. And I also needed, what I discovered was that, I don't know if you can see this. This is from, oh, you can't see it. Can you? Oh, it's from a book. I'm virtual. Okay. Anyway, it's like 35 pages of fine print tracing where all of the known bronzes are. And many of them are in this estate or that estate or this museum or that museum, but some of them are unlocated. So I needed bronzes from certain years that this person would have collected them that were unlocated, which is hence why they're in Door County in the family's private collection. So it was really complicated, just trying to piece all of these elements together, as opposed to, but that happens to me all the time. You think it's going to be easy and it's not.
Yeah. But yeah, but you've done a really fantastic job, especially, and now it's sad. We have to discuss the sad thing that this is the end of the series.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's bittersweet, and it was a tough decision to make, but I always knew from when I started the series that it would end, and it would end when Cubiak had finished his journey, his personal journey. So it's like, well, can I keep pushing it off and pushing it off? And maybe I could have, but I had moved him through time, and he's all the pieces came into place that this needed to be the end of the story, the end of his journey, not the end of his life, obviously. I mean,
right.
And other things may still happen with him, but for now, this is the end of the series.
Yeah.
And it really, it was hard to do, because I keep getting, I get emails from readers saying, oh, I can't wait for the next one. It's like, oh, well, sorry. Or people will suggest, how about this idea or that idea? I mean, there are a dozen different ideas of books that could be written, but I wanted that emotional element to be integral to the story. And that part has been taken care of.
Yeah.
Therefore, it's finished.
Yeah, he needed to have some closure, and I certainly felt that at the end reading it, that he, had come to acceptance, or, like the final stages of grief in his process. And, although grief never goes away, he had at least seemed to come to some closure.
You learn to live with it, and he learned to live with it. Yeah. And that was kind of the message of the whole thing.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's really wonderful. And sad, because I know that people will be wanting the next book and wanting to hear, what are you going to do next?
Oh, good question. I have, like every writer, the manuscript in the drawer that either should be like burned or maybe revised and worked on. So I have a couple of those, and I'm going to take a look at them. One's a novella that has nothing to do with mysteries at all, and one is a mystery that moves between a small town in Wisconsin and Minnesota, Minneapolis. So and it's just all women in that one. They're the primary characters and actors. So that's the one that's kind of calling to me to look at, and maybe it should be burned. I don't know, but I need to take a good hard look at it and see if I can we'll see what I can do with it.
Right.
And beyond that, I have to admit that I really admire people who write historical mysteries. So I'm intrigued by that, but I'm also overwhelmed by the notion of all the research that would have to be done. So whether I would venture into that or not, I have no idea. But it's one of those little things that's sitting out there.
Right. I know, I love historical mystery too, but yeah, it seems daunting. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. And I'm sorry we don't have time for all of our questions. But where can your readers find you if they're looking?
Well, if you go to patriciaskalka.com, that's my website. And you can also just type in my name and it jumps to that, or Dave Cubiak, and it will jump to that. But it would be my website is out there.
Yeah, great. And do you have any events planned coming around the launch of this book?
Right, excuse me, right now, I've got, I'll be at Boswell Books probably at the end of June. The book is slated to come out at the end of June, but there are always potential problems with paper supplies and Lord knows what else. And I'll be doing something with Right on Door County, and I don't know exactly when that will be. We're trying to set that up, and there will be Mystery to Me. I always do a launch there, so that will be slated. We don't have these scheduled yet, but there's a certain certain kind of pathway that I take, and I'll be doing different events around that, and signing books and doing library events and various things, and hoping to be at BoucherCon in September. So there's a lot on the table.
Yeah. Well, I hope to see you at BoucherCon too, because I'm hopefully going as well. Thank you again. And you can find this video on blackbirdwriters.com. And thank you so much for watching today.
Thanks for having me.